It's time to bring you yet another amazing episode. And now, welcome your host.
Welcome to Lauren Farina by Omobola Stephen, where disruptive yet constructive mindship conversation lives. My name is Omobola Stephen. I'm the host of Lauren by Omobola Stephen. Now, on the podcast, really, we focus on personal development and self-improvement topics. We occasion professionals who are adept in these topics. They provide exceptional, insightful insight that is going to move you from where you are to where you need to be. Now, the importance of embracing personal development and self-improvement can never be overemphasized, because when we intentionally do this, we get to find ourselves along the way, and in finding ourselves, realize that there's so much possibilities and opportunities that life has in store for us. Now, if we don't give up, personal development and self-improvement is a lifelong process that we must embrace in order for us to see the changes that you and I are really seeking for in this life at the end of the day. It is a constant effort we must continue to put on. And indeed, changes can be discomforting and uncomfortable sometimes. But the mission and the focus of the podcast is for us to be intentional about our living in order for us to really enjoy all the bounties that life has in store for us. I will be having Lauren Farina on today's show. Now, Lauren is the founding CEO and psychotherapist at Invited Psychotherapy and Coaching. She's joining me on the show today. She's going to talk about how we can, she's talking about the high performer archetype with the audience of the show. Welcome with me, Lauren Farina.
Thanks so much, Omobola. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining me on the show. Looking forward to this topic of discussion. Really, you wanted to discuss the high performer archetype with the audience. So come on, I think we can do this. So I'd like to start off with the personality traits of perfectionism. Can we understand the psychology behind perfectionism?
Yeah, so perfectionism is a trait I see very often in my clientele. And I define perfectionism as the tendency to have unrealistically high expectations for ourselves. I think historically, many of us have worn perfectionism as a badge of honor. It feels like something that we should strive to embody and to achieve. But I really love what Brene Brown says about perfectionism. She defines perfectionism as fear with designer shoes on, right? So in other words, perfectionism is a cover-up for or a compensatory effort for fear and often shame. And it's not to say that we shouldn't hold ourselves to high standards and that we shouldn't have high expectations for ourselves. We should. But when we strive for perfectionism, we strive for an unattainable ideal that keeps us fixed in that fear and shame cycle. So, there's duality in all things, and there is especially duality in perfectionism. I know a lot of my clients would say that their perfectionism has compelled success and precipitated ambition and really driven them forward. And that's true. Perfectionism can do that. But as I mentioned, perfectionism often does come at a cost, and that cost can be our fear, our shame, and our overall mental health.
Oh, all right. So therapy, can you really solve perfectionism?
Can we solve perfectionism? Well, Omobola, I think that's a great question. I practice a form of therapy called internal family systems therapy. And what you really need to know about IFS is that it holds that the personality is multifaceted. Our personality is comprised of multiple different parts, and there are no bad parts. In fact, that's the name of the book that the creator of IFS, Richard Schwartz, wrote, No Bad Parts. And so perfectionism is one such part. It's not a bad part, but there is, good and bad in it. And so what I seek to achieve with my clients is to broaden their understanding of perfectionism, to really become aware of, how does this part serve me And when does this part not serve me anymore, right? So for instance, if I'm working with a surgeon, you know, I don't know about you, but if it's my family member on the operating room table, I want my surgeon to be perfectionistic, you know, to a certain degree. That is the time when we might want to pick up perfectionism as a tool. But later on in the day, when that surgeon goes home to perhaps help their son or daughter with their math homework or lay their head down on the pillow at night to sleep, that person might need to put down that perfectionism, right? To put it down like a finely honed tool. So to solve perfectionism or to cure perfectionism isn't necessarily my aim. My aim is to instill agency in my client, the agency to choose, when do I want to really lean into this trait of perfectionism? And when do I want to ask it to step back because I don't need it anymore? So it is nuanced, but overall, yes, I think it's entirely possible to really gain that sense of agency and empowerment so that you can reap all of the benefits of perfectionism with few of the costs.
But really, don't you think that perfectionism, don't you think it is inherited?
Is perfectionism inherited? Um, You know, I know that that's one theory. And there are some experts who believe that perfectionism can be passed down through our DNA that we inherit from our parents. I think about it a little bit differently. I think that perfectionism is a skill, it's a trait that we learn early in life to help us to adapt to some challenge or stressor. So I'll share with you that many of my clients report having learned early in life, when I'm perfectionistic about my grades, about keeping my room tidy and in order, about my performance in sports, then I get all of this love and affection and praise. Maybe I get it from my parents, maybe I get it from my teachers and my coaches or my teammates. But in that sense, perfectionism is in essence, a survival mechanism that's helping us to attach to the people around us, to secure our sense of safety and belonging, and therefore to maximize our odds of surviving. It's really interesting, Omobola. Studies have shown that infants as young as 3 months of age can begin to sense what their parents want and need and make minor adjustments to their behavior accordingly. And this is a really good idea on behalf of the infant because it ensures their secure attachment to their parent, right? It ensures their parents' attention and approval and acceptance, which is critical for the survival of that infant. And so we do this all throughout our childhood. We sort of sense and intuit what the people in our lives, and particularly our caregivers, expect from us. And we seek to meet those expectations in some way or another, either through perfectionism or other traits, in an effort to feel safe and secure. So yes, some people do theorize that personality traits like perfectionism are inherited, and perhaps there's some truth to that. But I'm more of the mindset that perfectionism is a learned behavior and a learned survival mechanism.
Okay, so but really, how can we get from this route, get up on this route? We have those who are recurring perfectionists, but at the end of the day, they find themselves back into the system. So how can they really get out of this? So what are these changes that they begin to anticipate in their life in order for them, to move out of this dysfunction, as I put it?
Yeah, so I'll share a couple of the primary strategies that I use in my work with clients, and I think probably the most impactful strategy that I do in almost every client's first session is a values alignment exercise. Because what I've learned is that for perfectionists, especially, perfectionists tend to focus on everybody else's expectations. right? They really tend to tune into the world around them. And perfectionists and high performers tend to be really good at anticipating the wants and needs of others. So just like a radio, we have to tune out from one station in order to tune in to another. And because of that, many high performers, not all, but many high performers and perfectionists tend to live a life that may not be congruent with their own values. And the word values just refers to the things that matter most to us in life, whether it be family or spirituality or health or nature. But if we're so perfectionistic that we don't allow ourselves to perhaps disappoint others or run the risk of being judged by others, it can be really difficult to make choices that support the things we value most. So values alignment is critical. So what I'll do is I'll take clients through an exercise in which I encourage them to identify 5 or fewer core values. Now, many of my clients will say, I've got 10 or 15, you know, I can't narrow the list that much, but the list is intentionally limited because we really want to hone in on the things that matter most, right? If you've got more than 5 priorities, you've really got no priorities. And so once my clients have narrowed their list of values to 5 or fewer, we'll take inventory of the choices and the behaviors that they make on a day-to-day basis, and whether or not those choices and behaviors are in alignment with the things that matter most. And again, oftentimes with perfectionists and high achievers, that they might notice that they're living quite a values misaligned existence. And so beginning to make small changes, just small tweaks to the way they spend their time and energy in a way that's more reflective of those values can be really healing.
Absolutely. I think that word energy is very important. When we begin to focus on our energy and what is truly rewarding, and important, I think it goes a long way to help us emotionally and also mentally. Now, do you think people pleasing go hand in hand with perfectionism? Do they connect?
Absolutely. And over my years of working with this high performer personality, I've identified what I call the high performer archetype. And it is a cluster of personality traits that are common, not universal, but common among high performers. And that archetype includes both perfectionism and people pleasing. And of course, people pleasing is the tendency for us to prioritize the wants and needs of others ahead of our own, always as a rule. Now, of course, sometimes it can be really adaptive, right? It can be a really quite a good thing to prioritize the wants and needs of others sometimes. But when that's our default behavior, when we don't even stop to think, is this what I really want? With intentionality, like you talked about earlier, we can it can stress our mind and our body in a way that predisposes us to things like anxiety and depression and burnout.
All right. So again, what is the best therapy for people pleasing?
Let's talk about that word intentionality, right? Which really goes hand in hand with the agency that I try to work with my clients to instill. It's not that doing for others is ever a bad thing. It's when we are compulsively doing for others out of fear of their judgment or disappointment that we might find ourselves overwhelmed and out of alignment. And so the first step is always awareness, just like with perfectionism, understanding how does people pleasing operate in my life? And when is it really serving me and serving those I love? And what is it costing me? Is it costing me my peace? Is it costing me my relationships? Paradoxically, often people pleasing behaviors develop with the intention of strengthening relationships. We think if I just do everything everybody wants me to do, then I'm going to enjoy these really strong and connected relationships. But what tends to happen when we are compulsively people pleasing without intention and without boundaries is that resentment tends to fester. And ultimately, the resentment that can grow with compulsive people pleasers presents a bigger threat to relationships than the boundary would have in the first place, right? So really understanding the nature of that part, it's another part, just like perfectionism, understanding how it serves you and those around you, but also understanding its cost is the first step. And once we have a finely honed understanding of that part, we can begin to choose when to pick up the people pleasing like a tool and when to put it down when we don't need it anymore. Again, values alignment is, I think, a really important exercise across the board, whether we're dealing with perfectionism, people pleasing, codependency, because it requires us to really take inventory of how we spend our time and energy, and whether that's what we really want or intend for ourselves.
All right, thank you, Lauren, for sharing that with my audience. Now, we are talking about the high performer archetype, and we talked about the perfectionism. We also talk about the people pleasing. Now, let's look at codependency, right? But I'd like us to look at codependency along with empathy. Why is empathy often mistaken for a different dysfunctional behavior, which is codependency?
That's such a good question. I define codependency as the compulsive need to be needed, right? The need to be helpful, the tendency to take responsibility for people and things that just aren't ours. And again, codependency in some ways can be adaptive. If I'm a child of a parent who is struggling with addiction, then I've got to take responsibility, right? If I have a parent who can't get out of bed in the morning or who isn't coming home at night, I need to take responsibility for perhaps my younger siblings. That's adaptive. That's going to help us to survive. But codependency, again, costs us quite a bit. It costs us our boundaries. It costs us our values. It costs us our opportunity to take care of ourselves and focus on what really matters. Codependency is often mistaken for empathy, which is the ability to feel for and with other people. But the difference between codependency and empathy is that codependency takes responsibility for other people's thoughts, feelings, and needs, whereas healthy, at least healthy empathy, does not. So really working with people with codependency around feeling empathetic, feeling compassion for others without taking it on as their own burden of responsibility, right? Because just like people pleasing, chronic codependency can lead to the kind of resentment and burnout that threatens relationships in a bigger way than healthy boundaries.
Right. So, so do you think that these personality behaviors we just talked about, do you think they can be linked to mental illness? And really, what are the root causes of mental illness?
I do. I think that a lot of these personality traits that we're talking about, perfectionism, people pleasing, and codependency, are strongly associated with anxiety in particular, right? Because if we have the burden of responsibility for meeting unrealistically high expectations, fulfilling the needs and desires of those around us, and taking on the problems, the thoughts, the feelings, the pain of the people in our lives, then our nervous system is going to react. Our nervous system is constantly scanning our environment for cues of safety versus cues of danger. Whether or not we're aware of it, our nervous system is always looking to keep us safe. And so when we feel overwhelmed, when we are overworked, when we aren't taking care of ourselves, our nervous system registers these inputs as threats. Our nervous system doesn't know how to differentiate, by the way, between imagined threats and real threats. It can't differentiate between physical threats and mental and emotional threats. It just knows, I feel stressed, I sense danger, I'm going to activate. And chronic nervous system activation, according to the polyvagal theory, is a root cause of mental illness, and especially anxiety and even depression. And when the nervous system has when the body has been depleted, in an effort to conserve energy, there's that word again, the nervous system adjusts, right? And so we might enter a functional freeze state, which might look like depression, paralysis, and shutdown. So to answer your question, yes, these personality traits are strongly associated with anxiety and ultimately depression. And then you ask, what's the root cause of mental illness? Well, in my practice, I've been practicing for about 20 years. I've identified 3 root causes of mental illness. And, this is controversial depending on who you ask. But I think values misalignment, what we talked about earlier, is a major root cause of mental illness. Now, according to the research of Dr. Gabor Mate, who is a family physician turned traumatologist and addiction specialist, he's also written a number of books that have changed my life. Gabor Mate says when we are living inauthentically, basically when we are denying or repressing our thoughts, feelings, and needs, and are therefore out of alignment with our values, this stresses our nervous system and our immune system in such a way that predisposes us to mental illness and physical illness. So for instance, if I have a passion for creating art, and instead I'm working a desk job day in and day out that I loathe, right? That makes me feel miserable and disconnected from myself. That's an example of values, the kind of values misalignment that may precipitate ultimately a condition like anxiety and depression. So values misalignment is one. According to the polyvagal theory, nervous system dysregulation is another root cause of mental illness. Basically, when we experience an acute trauma or chronic stress, it can change our nervous system state in such a way that we become stuck. We either become stuck in a state of sympathetic dominance or fight or flight, and that looks like anxiety. Or like I said, we may become stuck in a state of functional freeze, which might look like depression. And then I think the third root cause of mental illness has to do with our energy metabolism. So you might take that literally. 80 to 90% of Americans have some sort of metabolic dysfunction. So even subclinical insulin resistance can deprive our brain of the energy it needs in order to function optimally. So, the way that we eat, the way that we spend time on screens with little to no time outdoors or little to no exercise, all really contributes to this kind of metabolic dysfunction that is a major factor for the development of mental illness. But even if we look at energy metabolism from a figurative or metaphorical lens, if we are expending more energy than we are taking in or than we have, just like with money or any other finite resource, if we're spending more than we have, we're going to bottom out. We're going to get in trouble. And so either literal biochemical energy metabolism or figurative or metaphorical energy metabolism in terms of I'm just doing more than I have the capacity to do, that's a major cause of mental illness as well.
Talk about the strategies for optimizing performance, motivational, and overall well-being. Can you share your insights with the audience?
Yes, absolutely. So in addition to values alignment, which I covered, and again, I think values alignment is just foundational to optimizing brain health and brain function for performance and well-being. I think nervous system regulation is another really important strategy. And again, that's because when our nervous system becomes stuck in a stressed state, our brain and body can't function optimally, right? Our mind and our body can only function optimally in a state of what's called parasympathetic dominance, otherwise known as the calm, rest, and digest state. Because our nervous system says, listen, if we're chronically stressed, we're assuming that we're facing imminent danger. We don't have time to think clearly or to think critically or to make sound decisions or to connect with the people we care for. None of that matters when we're facing life or death. And again, remember, our system doesn't know the difference between real threat and imagined threat, physical threat and mental or emotional threat. So even just having an overwhelming number of emails in your inbox might trigger the nervous system to say, oh, this doesn't feel safe, right? We have to activate our stress response program. And so regulating the nervous system really involves sending cues of safety to the mind and body regularly as a practice, right? We're trying to restore the body's sense of safety so that it can achieve and maintain that state of parasympathetic dominance. And so there are a lot of ways to do this. Breath work is a really powerful way to regulate the nervous system because our breathing is so closely linked with our nervous system state. I ask people to consider, when you are stressed, do you hold your breath? I know I do. When I'm stressed, I'm like holding my breath and then I'm sighing big sighs because my breath is trying to regulate itself. Or we take in air when we're startled, or we gasp in horror, right? When we are taking in air, when our breathing is, when there is an emphasis on the inhale, this activates the sympathetic nervous system, our fight or flight response. Versus when we emphasize the exhale, like when we climb into bed after a long day, or we just get a bit of good news, we breathe a sigh of relief. Emphasizing the exhale really activates that calm, rest, and digest state of parasympathetic dominance. So I'll encourage my clients to spend 3 to 5 minutes per day doing breath work. And there are a lot of different ways one can breathe during that time. I really like something called box breathing, which includes inhaling through the nose for the count of 4, and then holding that breath for the count of 4, and then a deep yoga exhale for the count of 4. And do that over and over for 3 to 5 minutes every single day, not just when you're stressed, but as a practice. And you will very slowly over time be toning and regulating your nervous system and cultivating more of a parasympathetic state. But in addition to breath work, things like meditation and yoga and listening to binaural beats, or even just getting outside in the sunlight for a walk can be extremely regulating to the nervous system because nature is so regulating to the nervous system. We were really designed to be in nature, and when we're separated from nature, our body registers this separation as a threat. So there are a number of strategies one can employ to achieve that state of calm and rest and nervous system regulation. But I encourage people to pick one or two, practice them daily, and over time with consistency, really yield some powerful results. In addition to values alignment and breath work, gratitude practice. People talk about gratitude practice a lot, almost to the point that it feels cliche or overdone. And I worry that perhaps we miss out on its meaning. But gratitude practice is so important because it is true from a neuroscience perspective that what we focus on expands. And again, that's not magic, that's not mysticism, it's neuroscience. The salience network of our brain compels us to look for the known and the familiar, because if we're familiar with something, even a thought pattern, it's likely safe, right? That's sort of the way that our brain operates in order to protect us. This is the reason why many of us are vulnerable to something called confirmation bias, which is we subconsciously seek out information and experiences that confirm what we already believe to be true. So for instance, if I believe myself to be an unlucky or incompetent person, if that is one of my core beliefs, I'm going to subconsciously seek out information and experiences that confirm that belief that I'm unlucky to be true, right? It doesn't feel good, but it feels familiar and therefore safe. So what gratitude practice invites us to do is to focus on all that goes well as a way of rewiring our brain for positivity. So if we can seed our subconscious with the belief that, hey, I am blessed, or this world is a friendly place, or other people can be trusted, then I will subconsciously seek out those more positive, more life-affirming experiences as well. And this is so important from both a nervous system perspective and a metabolic perspective. Remember, the nervous system is constantly scanning for threats. And so if you're set in the way of regulating the nervous system is by sending the body and the mind cues of safety. So focusing on the random acts of kindness that a stranger might do for you, or the moments of connection with a family or a friend, or the sound of the birds chirping in the morning, that does send cues of safety to the nervous system. It is also a way of regulating the nervous system. And when our nervous system is regulated, we tend to enjoy more robust metabolic health as well. But I'll add, on the subject of metabolic health, the research of Dr. Chris Palmer out of Harvard has been so compelling, that metabolic dysfunction is a root cause of mental illness. And so really focusing on eating a diet of whole, unprocessed foods, really focusing on maintaining a regular sleep-wake cycle, getting regular exercise, and especially getting outside and getting exposure to unfiltered sunlight on our skin and our eyes, in a safe way, is really important to help regulate the body's metabolic function and therefore brain function. Okay.
Thank you so much, Lauren.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
I really appreciate your thoughts on that. I really appreciate your thoughts on that indeed. Now, do you have any exciting news or projects you think the audience is going to benefit from? You can share that if you have any.
Yeah, thanks so much. I mean, I think this year we're really focusing on building our online presence. We've been really focused on clinical practice and developing a robust clinical program at Invited. And now we're sort of turning our attention to expanding our reach and expanding our platform. So meeting here with you is, a part of that. And I so appreciate the opportunity. And in addition to building our online presence, we are building out our coaching program. So in addition to my role as psychotherapist and founder, I'm also a performance coach. And coaching is really for folks who are already high functioning, but are just looking to optimize one of those key areas that we focus on. So, I hope you'll join us at our website, which is www.invitedoakpark.com. You can subscribe to our monthly newsletter, or you can check us out on Instagram at invited.llc.
Thank you so much, Lauren Farina, for sharing your thoughts on today's show, especially as you talked about the high performer archetypes. Thank you for the strategies, the tips that you provided to the audience of Library by Omobola Stephen. Now, on behalf of the audience of Library by Omobola Stephen and hi, Omobola Stephen, we sincerely, from the bottom of my heart, wish you all the best of luck in the projects that you embark upon. Lauren?
Thank you so much, Omobola. It's been a pleasure.
It's a pleasure indeed. Now, if you'd like to catch up with any missed episodes of the podcast, you can do so on any cross promotion platforms you bump into, on any podcast distribution platforms you bump into online, and do have a great time. Listen to professionals share disruptive yet constructive mindship conversations on topics and subjects that are related to personal development and self-improvement that are life-transforming and positive changing indeed. Till I come your way, I always need you to stay safe. I talk to you soon. My name is Omobola Stephen once again. Thank you once again, Lauren, for your time and for the valuable contribution to the topic of discussion.
My pleasure.
If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you subscribe and leave us a review.